Good evening, friends, colleagues, neighbors, and fellow members of our community. I'd like to welcome you to our Democracy Town Hall. My name is Johnny Martin, and along with Reverend Medina Moore, we are the voting rights organizers for the Arizona Faith Network. And I'd like to welcome you to this event on behalf of the Arizona Faith Network, as well as our partners with the African American Christian Clergy Coalition, the American Center for Religious Freedom, and the Arizonans for Fair Elections ballot initiative.
I want to introduce our panel of speakers tonight. We have Pastor Aubrey Barnwell with First New Life Church, and he is our new AACCC chairperson. We have Dr. Jana Scott with American Center for Religious Freedom, and we have Tedessa Mayberry with Arizona Democracy Resource Center, and she's going to be giving us some information on our ballot initiative. So we're grateful to have everyone here.
My name is Reverend Katie Sexton Wood, and I serve very humbly and gratefully as Executive Director of the Arizona Faith Network, giving us the ballot and ensuring that all people throughout Arizona have access to express their vote. We gather tonight in the midst of a legislative session that is winding down, but one that has been historic in nature in Arizona. We have seen over 100 bills that have been threatening our right to vote here in Arizona. Tonight we are gathering as people of diverse faiths from all over this great state to proclaim that whatever our color, our background, our age, our ability, our zip code, we believe that voters pick our leaders. Our leaders do not pick which voters to hear and which to silence. We believe that we were created with a sacred voice, and voting is how we as people express that voice. As a pastor of a congregation, I preached the sermon before that we cannot separate our understanding of our morality when it comes to voting and our religion. Our religion teaches us how to be in society together and how to act together as a community, and how we vote, and our democracy also lays out rules of how we are to be together and how we say we will act together as a community. That's why it is pivotal as people of faith for us to gather and protect our cherished right to vote. With that, I am so honored to introduce my dear colleague, a great prophetic community leader, and I am honored to say a friend, Pastor Aubrey Barnwell, who is the chairperson of the African American Christian Clergy Coalition in Arizona. Pastor Barnwell.
Thank you, Reverend Katie. So appreciate this opportunity to be able to speak. I want to thank all of those, Johnny and Medina, for leading this effort and all the technical support you are doing, and for all of those who are gathering here along with my other panelists. Just briefly, I want to just raise this question and then converse about it just a little bit. What does God say about the right of an individual to have his or her voice heard? What does God say about the right of an individual to have his or her voice heard? I take from this, there's a parable in the Matthew chapter 25, a parable of a master who gives a talent to each one of his servants. He gives them at least one talent according to their own ability. And that talent is to be used or by that servant to produce according to his or her abilities. And they have a choice on what to do with the talent. I like to think of this talent as a vote. Your vote is important to your livelihood. It's important to the livelihood of your family. It's the ability to provide for your family and your loved ones and to support community to come together. And I don't believe anyone, no other servant has the right to take, steal, or destroy your talent. And in that question that comes again, what does God say about this? He identifies that he gave the talent and he's holding each individual responsible for what they do with the talent. What an individual chooses to do with their vote is that individual's choice. And as a man of faith, of Christian tradition, I choose to seek God for direction at every election. Based on my own personal conviction, I vote. And I believe that each individual should have that right to be able to choose that, to be able to select and identify how they choose in every election. I believe the heart of our democracy is that people have the authority to deliberate and decide legislation or to choose governing officials to do so. So who is considered to be the people and how that authority is shared among or delegated here in the United States and in Arizona has and is under siege. So what is ultimately tied to administrate justice. Justice is what we're looking for. Justice is what we identify. Justice is what is necessary. We look for justice. And what we just heard from Dr. King is that ultimately give us the ability to vote, to speak our voice, to be able to speak collectively. And we, the people, we who are defined as those who are citizens here, those who are identified as individuals who have the right and the ability to speak and give our voice, so that justice can be heard, justice can be understood, and justice can roll down. Thank you so much for allowing me to have this opportunity.
Thank you so much, Pastor Aubrey, and those powerful words of what does God say about our right to the individual to have his or her voice heard. And I like the framing of the ballot or the vote being the talent. I like that. It's very good. And that we're after justice and we believe in democracy. We want to uphold democracy. And that's why we're here today. And we're honored to have people of all faith traditions here. And we're all united in one thing. And with unity, anything can abound. And so we want to pose another question as we heard Pastor Aubrey's question and his theoretical answer to it. We'd like to hear from the community. And we'd like to hear about any barriers that you've encountered, and then what you feel about those barriers impacting your community. We've seen language barriers.
Homelessness, I see, is also in the chat. Not having an address certainly is a barrier.
Those polling place barriers. We got to have virtual with our Maricopa County recorder last week, and we're hoping that we'll see some of these barriers being lifted and more access and greater understanding for those communities that are impacted. Navigating government websites, Arizona government websites. It took me some time to get familiar with the legislature, and I still have to ask questions sometimes. It's absolutely right.
Mobility, accessibility definitely is a huge issue, is a barrier for a lot of folks.
They did say that vote by mail would still be available, but we're seeing barriers to that. We're seeing a lot of barriers coming in, and it's actually unfortunate to read these things, and that's why we're here today, because we want to try to eliminate as many barriers as we can and allow everyone the access to their vote, to their talent. Questioning, undermining, having to stand in line, not being given vote by mail access. Again, we're seeing these things, and we have the opportunity to speak with our county recorder. We want to get our voices heard. Our communities need to be present and to speak out of the things that are happening here, because we're going to make a change.
Also from Facebook being shared, the voting sites changing frequently, not having access to any polling location, but having it restricted to, only what's in your precinct. And then, if there are long lines, also not having the option for some folks who are working to take a day off of work just to go to that polling location and spend hours in line, definitely is a barrier. I see redistricting mentioned here as well, and that's something we'll talk about more since all of the districts have changed. That has certainly caused confusion for a lot of voters.
Thank you for filling the chat with these barriers. And we understand we have a lot of work here to do in Arizona. Polling places being changed. We're seeing that here in the chat last minute. Johnny did say we would be speaking about the redistricting that's happening. We've got some things to overcome, and thank you all for letting us know and continuing to spread the awareness of what's happening here in Arizona. We're going to have some voter history of voter suppression in Arizona, and that's going to be sometime spoken by Dr. Janice Scott with the American Center for Religious Freedom. As we're seeing these things today, we'll have a little history lesson on how far back these issues have been happening here. So Dr. Janice Scott, thank you.
Well, thank you, and thanks to the Arizona Faith Network and our colleagues at AACCC and the Arizona Democracy Resource Center. I'm so grateful to be here with the American Center for Religious Freedom and speaking a little bit about the history of voter suppression in the US. But I first want to take a moment and ask us to all remember those who are going to be working the polls in this and future elections, that after what happened in the last election, we must hold them high in our hearts and in our minds and in our prayers for safety and security to prevail at these polling places and at these registration offices. We're so grateful for the work of recorders, county recorders across this nation, and the work they do to ensure the integrity of our democratic elections. But we're even more grateful for the people who, after seeing what happened at the last election, are still willing to put their lives on the line, basically, to uphold our democracy. So thank you for joining me in that. And I do want to say that I thank you so much, Katie, for sharing the Give Us the Ballot speech. That's one of my favorite speeches from Dr. King. And if you have not read the entire speech, I would really encourage you to do that. It was given at a prayer pilgrimage in 1957. And one of the places in here that I wanted to share talks about how we must not remain, how would you say, negative toward those who are the oppressors. This was the key to Dr. King's greatness and why, we still celebrate him many, many years after he has gone on, because even in the midst of hatred and violence, and in his case, even giving his life, and he knew that was coming, he still felt that our goal as we do this work should not be about pushing the other aside, not be about only our rights, but it really should be about everybody's rights. And this is the importance of the nonpartisan nature of the work that we're doing. This is not about pushing one party or two parties down and lifting another party up. This truly has got to be about every American, every Arizonan able to exercise their right of the free ballot, of voting, their right to be a part of determining the trajectory of our nation. And so I just wanted to share a little bit. And for those of you who may think this is going to be a little academic, I'm going to try to keep it a little lively, but it really is academic because I guess a couple years ago, the Carnegie Corporation funded the Brennan Center for Justice. And if you haven't examined the work of the Brennan Center and you are in the advocacy space, I really encourage you to do that. There is some great work that they've done, not only around voting rights, but around criminal justice reform, around immigration rights. And there's great intersectionality in all of this. Many people who are being oppressed by a system because of one attribute of their human existence are also being then doubly affected by another attribute of their human existence. And I can say that myself as an African-American woman, and I think each of us has experiences in that realm. But the Brennan Center did this very interesting piece on voting rights, taking it all the way back to 1700 and taking it up to 2020. And then I'm going to add where Arizona kind of gave our own spin on it in 2021, which most of us are not very proud of. So let's start back in 1700 with the great democratic experiment. If you know, put it in the chat, who had the right to vote when the nation was first established back in the 1700s? Anybody? Da, 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 da. Yes. Okay, Katie, you got to stay off the chat. You probably know this already. Right, Katie got it right. It is white male property owners, very specific set of property owners. And so despite their belief in the virtues of democracy, they still limited the right to vote, the right to shape the nation to white male property owners. And some states even employed a religious test to ensure that only Christian white male property owners were able to vote. So look at that. And then we go fast forward to the 1800s, and official barriers to vote actually started to recede. And do you know that in some states, during the Reconstruction period following the Civil War, with the passage of the 15th Amendment, there were some states where people could not be denied the right to vote because of their race. And if you look back, you'll see some states where they had African Americans in their state legislatures, in their state legislatures. Very interesting. Those states were not in the South. However, the South continued to use a range of barriers. If you know what one of those barriers was, and it starts with a P, put it in the chat. And Medina's keeping track of all these because I think we're going to have a gift card for the person who gets the most answers right. And I'll provide the gift card, Katie. Aubrey Barnwell, that's right, poll taxes. Can you believe that? Having to actually register to vote, you had to pay in order to register. So that cut out African Americans, that cut out even poor whites for that matter, not to mention the indigenous people and the other people of other races who were really scraping by in those days. Then fast forward to 1920. Who got the vote in 1920? Who knows that? Da, 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 da. White women. It was supposed to be all women, but yes, Johnny, white women in particular got the right to vote. Early in the 20th century, women still were only able to vote in a handful of states. And after decades of organizing and activism, women nationwide won the right to vote with the ratification of the 19th Amendment. But of course, the implementation of that in certain states had left a lot to be desired, right? So fast forward to 1960. Somebody said, I paid a poll tax in New Hampshire when I registered to vote for the first time in 1966. Hi, Gail. Good to see you. In 1960, Southern states ramp up barriers to voting. So this is where the struggle for equal voting rights came to the head. And, you know, Dr. King actually gave that speech in 1957. So things were starting to bump up even in the 50s in terms of people really just getting tired of being marginalized and left out of shaping the history of this nation and the trajectory of this nation. So things such as literacy tests, poll taxes. Who remembers the one about the jelly beans? Anybody remember that one? One state implemented a test that you had to identify the number of jelly beans in a jar. That just sounds so ridiculous, but this really happened. And so, of course, that kept people out of voting because even if you got the number right, I, as the Southern registrar, could just say, no, that's not right. Or worse yet, I could intimidate you and say, well, you better go home because, you know, tomorrow so-and-so may be in trouble at work or they may not have a job, you know, not to mention the strange fruit that appeared on Southern trees. Lynching, yeah. Who knows the name of the woman who wrote the songs? Well, I shouldn't say wrote the song, but what was one of the best examples of the song Strange Fruit? Speaking of the horrors of lynching. Okay, somebody put my answer in. Somebody said Billie Holiday, but who put in Nina Simone? I know that's my answer, but Billie Holiday is a good answer too. So this was really an unfortunate situation in the 60s. And you know the history of the 60s with all the brutality that happened in places like Selma, places like Montgomery, you know, with the Bloody Sunday, with the bus riders, with the dogs being attacked, being set on people to keep, even with the girls being bombed in the church. But in 1964, payment of tax, which was a prerequisite to vote in many states, was specifically designed to keep African Americans and low-income whites from voting. So this poll tax was probably one of the most egregious forms of voter suppression. And in 1966, the Supreme Court ruled that poll taxes were unconstitutional in any US election. So in 65, what happened? Anybody know the 1965? You can just put the initials if you want, with President Johnson, Dr. King, and all of the civil rights icons. What was signed? Yes, the VRA, the Voting Rights Act. Thank you, Pastor Aubrey. I think he's leading the pack now in terms of going toward the gift card, huh? So it was a measure that President Lyndon Johnson signed on August 6, 1965. And this barred many of the policies and practices that states had been putting up to limit voting among African Americans and others. One of the worst ones was this issue of pre-clearance, where states could set up laws and nobody even was monitoring that. But in 1965, the Justice Department was able then to require pre-clearance of certain laws so that states couldn't just put a law out there and not be questioned about the discriminatory nature of that law. And the pre-clearance provisions, listen to this, they proved remarkably effective for many years in keeping states from discouraging people to vote. But then who got the vote in 1971? Who remembers? President Nixon signed for young people. You know, the voting age was 21 for a long time. And in see, Paul knew it, but he said it, he put it in there too late. Give him a point anyway, Medina. It went from 21 to 18. And so you think about it. In 1960s, 18-year-olds were going to Vietnam and dying and fighting these wars and coming back maimed and PTSD and all that, but they couldn't vote. So in 71, that was changed. And then the 26th Amendment prohibited states and the federal government from using age up over 18 as a reason to deny the vote. And then in 1975, the vote expanded to protect language minorities. So all this time, and in many states still, unfortunately, voting ballots were not produced in all of the languages that were spoken in that jurisdiction. But the 1975 Voting Rights Act was supposedly to avoid that. It was expanded to avoid. So for those who had limited or no proficiency in English, states were required to provide voting materials in their language of choice and to provide multilingual assistance at polls. But we know in a lot of places that didn't happen. Then 82, thank goodness, disabled people, people with disabilities were given the right to vote. As part of that extension, Congress required steps be taken to make the polls more accessible. Think about that. I could keep somebody from voting prior to 82 if they were in a wheelchair just by making the doors too small or no ramps for them to get in. People with disabilities were really oppressed in this arena too. So let's not forget them when we talk about our partnerships. In 1993, motor voter became a law, and that means that people were able to vote when they did apply for their driver's licenses. So that facilitated a little bit. But then in 2000, what happened that caused a spotlight to come back on election reform? A 4-letter word beginning with C. The hanging what? Yeah, Paul got it. So he's neck and neck with Pastor Aubrey for the gift card now. The hanging Chad. Remember that? Some of you may be a little bit too young to remember that, but it was the election between Bush and Gore, and President Bush's brother was the governor of Florida, and he had appointed the Secretary of State of Florida. And the Florida ballots were coming in with Chads hanging, and it went through that whole process of counting and determining, well, is that a hanging Chad or is it a bubble? And it just really made people realize that we needed really to get a bit more focus on our elections and ensuring the integrity of the elections. And so then in 2002, Congress passes the Help America Vote Act with the goal of streamlining election procedures across the nation. So all of these machines that were producing these different Chads and things like that had to be replaced. They had to create statewide voter reg lists and provide provisional ballots to people who were eligible. Now, someone just put in the note, blind people got the right to a private and confidential ballot only this year in Arizona. There's something wrong with that. We were out of compliance with federal law all that time, if that's the case, because they should have gotten that in 1982. So thank you for sharing that. That was from Desert Rose Baha'i. So fast forward to 2010, all of a sudden philanthropy embraces the need for reform because they see these huge voting lines and they start funding groups to try to work on ensuring people had access to the vote. And they did a funder action called the State Infrastructure Fund, administered by Neo Philanthropy. And the fund was created and raised more than $56 million to advance voting rights and expand voting among historically underrepresented communities. But then in 2013, I think we all kind of did like this, like what? Who remembers what happened in 2013? Even if you know the name of the law, and I'll give you the first one, Shelby County v. who? Who was the AG at that time? Shelby County versus Eric Holder. It was a legal battle between Shelby County, Tennessee, and Eric Holder, of course, the Department of Justice on behalf of the US government, because the Shelby County, who had a history of suppressing voting rights, all of a sudden they wanted to get away with having to do the pre-clearance. And remember, the pre-clearance came up as part of the 1965 Act to say, if you're going to do something that even looks discriminatory, the Department of Justice has to look at it. It went all the way up to the Supreme Court. And do you know, by a 5-4 decision, the Supreme Court ruled the pre-clearance section of the Voting Rights Act unconstitutional. Now, I love RBG's comment when this happened. Ruth Bader Ginsburg was of course, a justice at that time. And she said, throwing out pre-clearance when it worked and is continuing to work to stop discriminatory changes is like throwing away your umbrella in a rainstorm because you are not getting wet. At least not now. And RBG was actually prophetic because she saw what was coming. And so in August 2013, 2 months after the removal of the pre-clearance, many states started ramping up barriers again, whether it was closing polling places or disqualifying different forms of ID, making people provide certain types of ID. Think of a centenarian who may not have a driver's license or a state ID anymore. All they may have is their social security card. They could no longer use that to vote. So in fact, on the same day of the Shelby decision, because of its impact in suppressing the vote of low-income people and racial minorities, the US Department of Justice filed another lawsuit against Alabama, Mississippi, Florida, Virginia. They all joined ranks of those intent on exercising their newly won power to turn back the clock on voting as a result of Shelby. So the voting right movement coalesces. People start getting together after 2014. Then we have the 2016 election, and there's all these claims of fraud, and we know all about what happened there and everything. And then even in the 2018 election, state officials kept erecting new barriers. So you began to see thousands of polling places automatically closed down. So where I used to go to vote all the time, all of a sudden now it was no longer there. And as a result of that, again, disproportionate impact on the disabled, elderly, communities of color. So fast forward then to 2018. And we all know about the record number of voters in 2018. Nearly half the eligible population cast ballots in 2018. Not only did voter turnout set a 100-year record for midterm races, but the election saw numbers of women and people of color running at all levels. But then 2019 came. Who knows what 2019 is about? I'm gonna have to give the answer quick because I've only got a minute and a half. 2019 was getting ready for redistricting. Well, yeah, COVID too, Johnny, thank you. We ought to give him a point for that because that was what I had on my notes. COVID and the census, Katie, that's exactly what I wrote. Those things converged. And then states and localities began to redistrict in late 2021. And guess what happened as a result of that? It's a G word, a lot of gerrymandering, unfortunately. So now you see these different districts that seem to capture a whole group of people and maybe disenfranchise a whole nother group. So watch your districts now. Your district where you voted in the last election may very well be different than where you voted in, where you will vote in 2022. Final 3 points. Number one, Arizona is known now as a leader in voter suppression because of Brnovich versus the DNC. We took Shelby versus Holder to a whole new level. And we have started to do some things in Arizona, whether it's all the different types of laws that have been passed to try to keep people from being able to use certain types of ID, or whether it was laws that was passed to say that you can't get your grandmother's ballot to the voting booth anymore. All these things in Arizona, we had over 100 laws introduced. But I want to thank, and I know some people might not understand this, but Rusty Bowers, who is the Speaker of the House, and he stopped the most egregious voting suppression bill by assigning it to 12 committees. And this is something that clearly he knew that bill wasn't going anywhere when you assign it to that many committees. So I just want to again end by saying, this is one of my favorite things in the Give Us the Ballot speech. And I think this is what we've got to go for. Dr. King said, give us the ballot and we will transform the salient misdeeds of bloodthirsty mobs into the calculated good deeds of ordinary citizens. Thank you very much. And Medina, send me the name of the gift card winner and I'll get that to Katie so she can get it to whoever that is. God bless you all. Appreciate the time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Scott, for sharing that wonderful research and your wisdom with all of us. I find myself, after learning so much of that history, both grateful for having learned it, but also very disturbed. Even things that I thought I knew, having it presented that way, especially with that full narrative chronologically, taking us back so early and then bringing us through the present day, we can see, and this is why we really felt it was important to include that contextual narrative from Dr. Scott. We can see that this hasn't been people struggling for their right to vote in a vacuum or in a void, right? This isn't happening in isolation, but it's an active and organized effort of voter suppression on the other side. And so the question that we want to engage in another community chat here, and feel free to, as before, type your response here in our Zoom chat. Do you think historic voter suppression is still impacting Arizonans today? Yeah, I think the instinct reaction, of course, we're seeing in the chat right away here is yes. Voter suppression is still impacting Arizonans and still happening. We've got the redistricting process, which, as mentioned, has been, confusing for a lot of voters, and the way it's been, rolled out in terms of making sure that voters know what their district is, who represents them. Obviously, we have the lack of automatic expungement and voter rights restoration. Yeah, especially when you look at things happening at the legislature, that's when we really can see the effort to suppress the vote. Tom Martinez in the chat, 200 years of oppression casts a long shadow. I think we heard that really clearly, with each year by year, we see that not only are there groups that are earning the right to vote, but there's a reaction, right? There's always forces that whenever protections are removed, they will step in to limit, suppress, and remove the right to vote. Proof of citizenship for registering to vote, right? Requiring voter ID. These are all examples of voter suppression that's still impacting Arizonans. Gail says here in West Mesa, she's going to lose a senator and representative because of the redistricting. And Maria, ballot initiatives. I'm glad somebody brought that up. So, ballot initiatives in Arizona, that's something unique to our state, along with a handful of others, where in Arizona's constitution is codified the right for us as citizens to pass laws and circumvent our legislature in doing so with these ballot initiatives, right? By collecting signatures for these petitions to get something directly on the ballot so we can vote as citizens, whether or not we would want to approve a law. And if it's approved that way, then the legislature is limited in their ability to undo whatever is passed. But of course, we have ballot initiatives being kicked off the ballot by the court, which is another form of voter suppression, because that's not allowing voters the chance to have their say on specific issues, which is the right of every Arizonan. I want to introduce our next speaker. So we're going to turn it over to Teresa Mabry from the Arizonans for Fair Elections Act, and really want to allow them to share more about what this ballot initiative in particular is going to allow us to do. So Teresa, take it away.
Good afternoon, y'all, or it's good evening, rather. My name is Maria Teresa Mabry. Any pronouns go with me. I'm a co-executive director with the Arizona Democracy Resource Center. We believe that democracy lives with the people, and no matter who you are and where you come from, in community, you should have a say in what happens in our community. So we just learned a lot. So drop a 1 in the chat if you learned something new today. Drop a 3 in the chat if you're ready to do something about it. So a 3 in the chat if you're ready to do something about it. A 1 in the chat if you've learned something new. Combine it and make a 4 if is both those things. So we're running a ballot initiative. Look at these ones. Okay, 3s, 1s. Okay, let's get ready to do something. Y'all, I come from a holiness tradition. So if I start rolling, somebody feel free to electronically pull my coattail so I can sit down. Yeah, we have a lot. Like, this is a beautiful place. I'm a 3rd generation Phoenician. My grandparents migrated from Mexico to be here to make sure that my family could live and thrive. My Black folks also migrated west to start churches out here and come from, my great-grandfather started the second Kojic church out here in Phoenix and was a bishop. And so my people come out here because they're farmers, they're educators, they're holiness people. They believe that we have a lot to do and a good work to do in community. And so I'm here today to talk about what we can do. So ballot initiatives are run by people because sometimes politicians get bought. And we're seeing that in a multitude of ways. And our people are under attack. They're dying. They're being murdered by the state. If you look at the city of Tempe, just let that man drown in the lake. We have a lot we can do. And we're past the point of partisan politics, when the right can go ahead and incite violence. And we're looking at an insurrection that we saw on June 6th in those court hearings. And folks who are happily toting that, running for office, whether it's Secretary of State or governor's positions, that our people deserve a lot better. Our people are working, they're struggling. Housing is, listen, my granny, I'm here on the South Side, bought her house and nobody thought the South Side would be what it is. It's worth over $300,000 now. You know, nobody wanted to be here. And I'm saying this and I'm talking about these stories because my people are part of my legacy and part of the work that I do, and part of the reason that I'm fighting, and part of the reason that I continue to build, and why the reason that I organize, because organizing is building power, right? So this ballot initiative, the Arizonans for Fair Elections, it's a Hail Mary of a ballot initiative because we saw over 100 attempts at making sure that our folks could not be engaged in what is relegated in the democratic, our system, our democracy, as the highest privilege and honor. Right? And yet we have over 50% of the folks who leave Perryville prison, the state's women's prison, come home to South Phoenix and don't have a vote. And so we're doing this work to ensure access to a ballot. So that's automatic or same day voter registration, reinstating PEVL, the permanent early voting list, corporate accountability, that corporations that have 50 more employees, they're currently paying $50, that they pay $150 to implement. You know, because sometimes our government like, oh, we don't have the money for that. We're gonna make sure you have the money for it. That lobbyist fees increase, they double from $25 to $50, and that it limits their ability to influence legislators. So no fancy trips, those fancy dinners, they get limited. And that it says that cyber ninja fraud bit is no longer acceptable, that the state legislature has to go by what the people say. And in fact, in this ballot initiative, we say that if you're going to modify the ballot initiative process, because the reason it's so expensive, the reason it's been so inaccessible is because the continued chipping away of it. The reason we say, like, if you're going to mess with this ballot initiative, you're going to make sure that it's better. We're going to make sure that we register everybody. We're going to put more money behind it. We're going to actually limit the ability to make sure that we are funding things. So if they're ready to do that, then they could mess with it. But it also says that tribes have a say at least where one location is, and any location has influence over any location on tribal nations. And so we're asking folks right now, we're in the qualification stage, which is the first phase. We got the language ready, we're collecting signatures. So we're asking our people to show out and show up and to collect signatures. And in order to collect signatures, you need to be a US citizen, 18 or older, be able to be registered in the state of Arizona. So have your rights intact and just ready to go. So we've got petitions ready to go. And I think I wanna, we look and admire Dr. King. And let's not forget, especially us Black folks, our people didn't die for a vote. Our people died so that we could have a taste of freedom. And it is our responsibility and it is our collective mandate to move forward, that each day that we get to be a little bit more freer and embodied. And when he talks about that little bit of divine that you get to taste, it's not just what you get to see or know who God is or whatever, however you move, but it's the reflection in each other that we get to see that divine. And when we talk about Fannie Lou Hamer showed up. Let's talk about it. 1964, Democratic Convention. What happened in Mississippi? Somebody jump in the chat. We're gonna go in the same vein. Mississippi, what's Mississippi got to do with it? Come on, y'all, somebody gotta know. Yes, Mississippi Freedom Delegation. These folks who were tired of not being represented, including Fannie Lou Hamer, showed up. Dr. King was giving a speech. He was doing his big old thing. They're like, nah, we need voting rights that are actually reflective of these people. So we need to show up and showed up. So they had the whole Mississippi Freedom Delegation show up and say, no, you're going to hear us, Black women and farmers, and you're going to listen to us. This is that ballot initiative. MLK was instrumental in making sure that these folks quieted down and moved out of the room, right? And so we can no longer be complacent. There is no room for complacency. And yes, that means like we have to be intentional about our building. We have to start building power with our people. Ella Baker says, when you show the people the light, they're going to find the way. And that when we have strong community members, we don't need strong leaders. And so that is the tradition that I'm leaning and calling on, is that every single one of us on this call, every single one of us who's in here, your family, your cousins, your aunties, your nieces, anybody who's your people, and happy Pride, y'all, that it is our responsibility and our mandate to shake things up and disrupt and show up and be like, no, you're not actually listening to me, that I need you to actually sign this petition. And it's not the petition that's going to save us, but it's the petition that's going to hold the line, right? And that petition is going to lead to voting rights, at least a little bit longer. It's going to lead rights restoration, access to bodily autonomy and abortion access and trans-affirming healthcare. Maybe we're going to put a rent cap or some policies on rent and affordability and accessibility. Maybe we're going to stop criminalizing houseless people for taking care of their business and then being charged as sex offenders for going to the restroom outside. We have that ability and have that power. And it's time that we actually utilize it and start being those beacons of light that we've been called to be, to actually move and shake and shift up this narrative that is responsible to talking about the violence that's been incited regularly, right? When he said, Proud Boys get ready, he was talking about violence, right? When we see these police officers refuse to save this houseless Black man in Tempe Town Lake, that's violence, right? And so when I say my Black life matter or my trans life matters, or that our people deserve access to affordable healthcare, we are talking about what it looks like to be free. This isn't a partisan issue. You could be on the right, and if you do not align with your leadership, then I dare you to do something. If you are a Republican, I dare you to do something to say that we deserve something different, because none of this violence, there's no space for that partisan mess anymore, right? Because the amount of violence that that's ensued by the state, that's been called on in these actions. These massacres are a result of this call to action. This isn't just because of 45. This isn't because of these political leanings, that there is a real root in history and legacy around a white national politic that calls for the erasure and the genocide of everybody who looks like you and me. Because there's a reason in the Constitution that white cis men who owned property and had an education could vote at the time of the Constitution. And there was a reason that they were Christians, right? Christians, we're gonna put that in quote. And so it is our responsibility and our duty, it's a mandate before us to go ahead and move things differently, to ask that we show up differently. So if you can't go outside, because I know it's 115 degrees, but if you in church service and they could take a collection, you could pass a petition. If you go into the grocery store or you going to go play bingo with your friends, you could bring a petition. It's Sunday lunch dinner with your family, bring a petition. We have notaries, we're going to take care of it. We plan on winning, right? Because the other thing that you have to remember, just like Fannie Lou when she showed up with the Mississippi Freedom Delegation, we have to disrupt the normative, right? We have to disrupt the status quo. And the reason we've been winning is the reason that these challenges have come and struck at us. And we're going to plan on continue to win. And it's harder, right? Because COVID, because of the grief that we're experiencing, because of the lack of jobs, because of all of these things that are hurting our people, that we have a responsibility to show up, because our mutual aid isn't new to our people. Come on. Mutual aid, like in my family, like, what do you do with those loaves of bread and that fish? Okay. You wash somebody's feet? Okay. When you needed something and you went to your cousins to get that help, did they take care of you? Did you go to your big mama's house and all your cousins were there and you had what you needed? Like, did you go to your neighbor's house and they could take care of you? When you came out and you could find safety in that one friend, did they take care of you and love you up? We have these opportunities and experiences as people in community to show up for one another. And now I'm asking you to sign this, right? And I know the vote isn't going to save us, but I'm asking us to be a little bit different and to shake up our normative space, to engage in conversations where we know we can have an Arizona we believe in. When I say Arizona, it's not about the state, it's about home, right? I'm a third generation Phoenician. It's about being able to be proud of where your home is and to be able to be safe and embodied in where you love, where you're not afraid of being proud of who you are, moving and showing your light, and understanding that strong people don't need strong leaders, that we just need each other, and that we can lean into each other and understand that when we do, and we center our people in these conversations, that we win. Because when folks have what they need, the world looks radically different. And so how do we make that happen? And that's about that.
Let's take a moment to talk about a system that has tried to break us. A system plagued by too many so-called representatives that refuse to acknowledge the power of our voices, that continue to use laws that try to silence us time and time again. Arizona voter laws are becoming the updated version of Jim Crow, poisoned with corrupt policy that continues to ignore us, tiring the people that fought the hardest to get here. Today, and every day forward, we say no more. We are tired of being ignored, and the day of reimagining has come. Imagine an Arizona that sees you, an Arizona where we all have an equal voice. Fair elections will do just that, with robust voting protections, such as protection for our ability to vote by mail or in person, which creates an accessible pathway to democracy for all people in our communities. By doing this together, we changed the game in Arizona with monumental and historical gains that honor those who came before us. With Arizonans for Fair Elections ballot initiative, we finally have the chance to create a world that honors our struggle and holds our power. Because powerful is what we are, and resilient is what we have become. It is time to be heard. It is time to be seen. It is time to resist. Sign the Fair Elections petition today and help build a better Arizona.
Paid for by ADRC Action, not authorized by any candidate.
Wow, Teresa, thank you so much for all of that. That was really powerful. I just want to echo some of what's in the chat. If you haven't read already, just we express gratitude for the power and inspiration that you've brought to this by sharing what you just shared. And I'm really grateful for your call to action there. And as Arizona Faith Network, we hear that and we want to take up that call to pass around these petitions like as if it were a collection plate, right? Let's say, let's get these signatures from the members of our communities who are ready and willing to participate in this with us. And so as Arizona Faith Network, we want to participate in this alongside all of our partners. And we're going to do that through our summer signature kickoff, which we're going to talk more about here in just a moment. I want to highlight what was just commented down here, that you are now being sort of asked to run for office, basically, let's say, because people want to vote for you. And I share that sentiment as well. So please, if you would, do us all a favor and run for something. So as our summer signature kickoff, what we aim to do is to, as I said before, we're going to answer that call that Teresa has just given all of us, and we're going to bring that to our members and our communities, all of the congregations that are part of our faith network. And in order to do that, we want to be responsive and timely about these actions. So we're ready now to visit your church, your synagogue, your mosque, your temple. And we're ready to bring representatives from AFN as well as from our partners. We'll bring petitions with us. We'll be ready to share if we're allowed to have some time and some space to educate folks in the community about what this ballot initiative aims to do and how it can help preserve this sacred right to vote for so many people. And so in order to do that, we want to hear from our network, from which congregations are ready to have us visit. There is a form where you can actually register, and we will send at least 1 to 2 representatives as needed with those petitions. We will work alongside you to make sure there are petitions for those who'd like to sign, as well as for those who'd like to take some to circulate for others, maybe outside of their church community, but who they're connected to by other means. And, we're happy to also provide any information, and we will stay alongside you in this effort, including after petitions have been signed, when folks are looking for how to get it notarized and dropped off. We will be there with you to make sure that we can get a notary to you or direct you to where you can get your petitions notarized. And we want to be a part of this and make this happen together. So it's going to take all hands on deck. I really appreciated, Dr. Scott, what you said before in the chat, that those of us who have been complacent really need to repent from that complacency and no longer be silent with something that affects our neighbors in such a big way. So thank you, Reverend Katie, for posting the form there in the chat for those who would like to register to have us visit your community. We're happy to do that on any scheduled date and time, by the way. So if that works best for your community on your regularly scheduled weekend services, we'd be happy to do that. If you have a preferred time during a weekday, whether it's a scripture study or a small group, whatever group is going to be most activated around this work, that's who we'd love to speak with and get in front of.
A great video. It is time. So we have a few questions in our chat here. Our first question: how do we find out about our voting districts? That's the first question. Johnny or Teresa, either one of you, or Reverend Katie, see she's joining us.
I'm going to get to that in our next steps. So I'm going to put a pin in that one.
Okay, great. Our other question: how do we get ballots delivered to us?
You just fill out that form, or you can sign up when you can re-register and make sure that you're on the permanent early, or it's the automatic voting list. It's not permanent anymore. But if you're not already registered, you can re-register at your address and then make sure that you mark you want your ballot by mail.
Thank you. Thank you. We've got another question from Tom Martinez in regards to the notary. Can we feel free to gather signatures without a notary present and then just get all of them notarized later prior to submitting the form?
You want to take that, Johnny?
Yes, absolutely. That is definitely sort of what we have envisioned here. So as long as the volunteer is able to sign and fill out that they're the one collecting all of the signatures for that specific petition, then at the end, they can take that, as long as it's the same volunteer who collected the signatures, they take that to the notary later on. And that works just fine.
Make sure on the back end that you do not fill that form out until you're in front of the notary.
Good call. Thanks, Teresa.
Thank you. Thank you. Do we have any questions from Facebook? Or any other questions? Drop them in the chat and we'll get those answered for you. I do just want to shout out First New Life Church and Apostolic Grace Temple Church with the AACCC, who have decided to collect signatures. Went and dropped off ballots there, so we're hoping to get those filled up. And on board. They are in South Phoenix, so excited about that. We are taking some ballots to churches and gatherings Fridays, Saturdays, Sundays. You can reach out to Johnny and I for ballots, and If you'd also like to join and participate with us, send us an email. Another question, is there any information also available in Spanish and other languages?
Right now we've got Spanish, other languages, not so much, but we're happy to collaborate with folks and can work it out. So if it's an indigenous language, we do have some contacts and maybe some French we could get, but would love to be in conversation with whatever folks need so we can get that resource to them.
Wonderful. And then Reverend Katie dropped in the chat, and the chat's moving here. It's moving pretty quickly. To find your new legislative district, there is a link for redistricting. It's there in the chat at 741. And then Johnny also our redistricting map as well to your new Congress and legislative districts that can be found there. So please copy the link so that you're able to find your redistricting maps and you'll know exactly where to go. Is there any other questions in regards to collecting signatures, getting ballots? Anything on Facebook? Any questions for Teresa? That was a very powerful, invigorating, getting us going. Anytime Teresa's on, I love it because you get us going. You get us going and mobilized, and we're ready. Okay. Thank you, Joe. You received a new card in the mail with your new LD or your ID or LD. So is there anybody who is committed to collecting signatures tonight? Anyone on this Zoom call? If you're committed to collecting signatures, we're gonna do numbers again. I like number 4, so drop a 4 if you're committed to collecting signatures. Johnny and I are going, First New Life is going. We've got Dr. Scott. We've got Maria, Karen, Katie, David, Teresa, anybody that's committed, Nancy. And it just takes a remnant. It just takes a small few to get that fire going, and then it ends up spreading. Basu, UMC and the Lutherans, thank you guys. The Buddhists. This is awesome. This is what unity looks like. This is absolutely what it looks like. It's people gathering together to do a thing. FIBC, I did speak with them. We're getting dates to collect signatures. You can also sign up for the Signature Summer Kickoff as well, and we can work with you on getting ballots to you. So, thank you so much, Teresa. Thank you, Johnny. We're closing early, but that's always a good thing. So any other questions? Our deadline for registration, is it July 7th?
It is the 7th. So here's the thing about this. So every signature that y'all do protects us in a lawsuit. So we know that part of the chipping away of the ballot initiative process is that there are certain opposition that tries and come and sue folks, just like they sue candidates for signatures, they're gonna be scrutinizing ours. And so volunteer signatures go under less scrutiny than paid signatures. And so every single one is like a little layer of protection. So even if it's just you and you are a single person on that sheet and it's just your signature, you turn it in, we gonna take it. That's a little bit more protection than we had. Even if it's you and your friend, like that's 2 more than we had. So every single one counts. So don't minimize, even if don't even worry about the paper that we're using. They're gonna recycle it, we're gonna be okay. Like, let's make sure that we can hold the line.
Absolutely, and to echo Reverend Katie, it doesn't just have to be at houses of worship. Wherever there's a gathering, bring those ballots, get those signatures. Our initiative is through the faith-based organizations and groups, but we want you to do it everywhere. So this was wonderful tonight. We got to hear about theologically your vote being your talent, and that's the God-given right, and you should use it. We got the wonderful historical overview of voter suppression, not just in Arizona, but in the United States, and how many people have been impacted, and how we are still fighting for equal rights for all. And we got the wonderful message from Teresa and how we can get on the Arizonans for fair elections ballots and get those signatures and make changes here in Arizona. And we do need your help because we do want to knock down these barriers to voting for Arizona citizens. Everybody should have the right. Everyone should have the access. And we need you all. So continue to stay connected with us through AFN's newsletter, through AACCC's newsletter. You can stay connected here. Johnny and I will drop our emails in the chat. Send us anything, hit us up, give us a message. And then Dr. Scott is asking me to announce the card winners for tonight. So we had a tie. So drum roll, please. Pastor Aubrey Barnwell and Paul Hansen. And if you can get your information over to us, we can get you all. Hopefully it's a gas card with the way these gas prices are looking.
I'll get with you, Medina, to get those cards.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Our emails are in the chat. If you don't have any other questions, anything you'd like to speak to the speakers about tonight, thank you all. This was wonderful. We're going to keep these going because we want to keep getting signatures and keep stirring folks up to make changes here in Arizona. And as Teresa said, a lot of people have rooted history here, and we don't want to see Arizona just go by the wayside. It was sad to hear that we're number one in voter suppression, but we're going to change that. We're going to change that. We're going to make changes. And there was 23 to 25 people on. There's people on the live. This is going to go viral, and Arizona's going to make these changes. We got to get our voices heard, and we got to work together no matter what, so that Arizona can see a difference. I have children. They'll be voting in about 3 to 4 years, and I want them to see that these barriers have been knocked down. So thank you all for being here with us. Anything that you'd like to share, please email us. We'd love to connect with you. Pastor Aubrey, would you close us out tonight?
I certainly will. God, we thank you and we praise you for the information we received tonight. And not only did we receive it, but we received it with passion, and we are inspired to do something. And so the commitments we made tonight to have petitions signed, to knock on doors, to share the message with others, we ask that you give us the power and that you remind us when we become tired, when we become weary, when we are challenged, that we would persevere. Father, we recognize that there are many things that have been spoken about over the state of Arizona, but we believe that you can empower us to do great things. So we bless you and we thank you for what you're going to do. We already declare the victory. We already declare that we will persevere, and we bless you for it. I thank you for it in the name of Jesus. Amen.
Thank you all. Amen. Bless you. Have a great night.